I'm going to say this up front. Restoring this ship was a mistake. 30 seconds after we powered the first panel, the ground beneath it started to respond. Not collapse, not crack, respond. And that's when I realized this wasn't a wreck waiting to be fixed. It was a system waiting to continue. We found a ship in broad daylight. No crash site, no debris field, just a matte black hull half embedded in solid rock, like the planet had grown around it. No scorch marks, no impact scars. Which means one thing, this ship didn't fall here. It was placed. Up close, the surface wasn't damaged, it was paused. Panels locked mid-cycle. Energy frozen in patterns that didn't decay with time. And when my instruments got too close, they spiked instantly, like the ship noticed us before we noticed it. I've restored ancient probes, derelict stations, alien machinery reduced to scrap. But this felt different. Not abandoned, not dead, just waiting. Against protocol, I touched the exposed panel. It lit up, not fully, just enough to show symbols. Alien, repeating, incomplete. And beneath my boots, I felt a vibration that didn't come from the ship. It came from below it. That's the moment everything changed. Because whatever this vessel was built to do, it wasn't finished. And by trying to restore it, we may have restarted something that was deliberately shut down. If you're into forbidden alien technology, dangerous salvage operations, and restorations that go wrong, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and comment your theories below. It genuinely helps the channel, and I read every comment. Now let me show you what happened when the ship realized it was no longer alone. The panel didn't just glow, it recalibrated. The symbols shifted position, rearranging themselves like they were correcting an error. My instruments went wild, spitting out readings that contradicted each other. Power spikes without sources. Magnetic fields bending in tight, deliberate arcs. This wasn't a machine powering on. It was a system recognizing input. I pulled my hand back. The panel stayed active. That's when the hum started. Not loud, not dramatic. Low, subsurface. The kind of sound you feel in your teeth before you hear it with your ears. And the ground answered it. Tiny fractures spread through the rock at the ship's base. Not random cracks, but precise geometric lines, forming patterns that matched the symbols on the panel. This wasn't structural failure. It was alignment. The ship was sinking with something beneath it. I ran a passive scan across the hull. No engines, no fuel chambers, no life support, nothing you'd expect from Starship. Instead, the internal structure looked layered, recursive, like the ship had been built around a core function and everything else was secondary. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The ship wasn't drawing power from itself. It was pulling it from the ground. Whatever this thing is, it doesn't travel between worlds. It interfaces with them. The ship isn't a vehicle, it's a node, a control point, a stabilizer, maybe, or a lock. The symbols on the panel flashed again, faster now. A new pattern emerged. Not language, not code, a sequence, not counting forward, counting towards something. I stepped back, suddenly very aware of how small I was compared to the structure beneath my feet. If this sequence completed, something would happen. I didn't know what, but I knew I didn't want to find out by accident. So I did the one thing every restorer tells themselves they won't do. I went deeper. The scan showed a void beneath the panel. Not empty space, shielded space. Whatever was inside had been deliberately hidden from external sensors, wrapped in a field so dense it bent my readings back on themselves. That alone told me enough. This wasn't a storage bay. It was a containment zone. The access seam revealed itself only after the sequence advanced 3 more cycles. A thin, vertical line appeared in the hull, no wider than a finger, perfectly straight. No hinges, no widths. Just a suggestion of separation, like the ship was deciding whether I was allowed to see inside. I hesitated. Every outlier case in restoration history starts like this. A system activates, curiosity overrides caution, and someone opens something that was designed to stay closed until very specific conditions were met. Conditions that usually don't include a lone restorer standing on a half-exposed hull in the middle of nowhere. But the sequence kept counting down, so I acted. I redirected auxiliary power into a localized destabilizer, barely enough to interfere with the seam without triggering a defensive response. The hull didn't resist. It adapted. The line widened, unfolding rather than opening, layers of material sliding aside like muscle fibers parting under tension. What lay inside wasn't machinery. It was architecture. Smooth, curved surfaces spiraled inward, forming a chamber that felt impossibly deep for the size of the ship. The walls were etched with faint markings, similar to the surface symbols, but more complex, more intentional. They pulsed softly, synchronized with the hum beneath my feet. And at the center of it all, a core, suspended, not by supports, but by a lattice of shifting energy strands. It wasn't glowing. It wasn't spinning. It was listening. My instruments confirmed it instantly. The moment the compartment opened, the core adjusted its internal state, reacting to environmental input. Reacting to me, the sequence accelerated. New symbols flashed across the inner walls, overlapping each other, resolving into a configuration that made my breath catch. This wasn't a warning. It wasn't an alarm. It was a handshake protocol. The ship wasn't waking up. It was asking permission. And if I answered wrong, I had no doubt this entire site, possibly the entire region, would become collateral damage in a system I didn't yet understand. I froze, not because of fear, because of recognition. The patterns forming along the chamber walls weren't random. They followed logic trees, conditional pathways, decision matrices branching and collapsing in real time. This was an alien chaos. This was structure, purpose, designed so refined it made most modern systems look crude by comparison. The core pulsed once. Every sensor I had spiked simultaneously. Gravitational distortion localized to the chamber. Time dilation at a fractional level. Barely measurable, but unmistakable. And beneath it all, that same low-frequency hum, now layered with harmonics that resonated through my bones. This ship wasn't reactivating. It was checking status. I ran a historical overlay against known crash signatures, atmospheric burn patterns, tectonic displacement models. Nothing matched. No impact trauma. No emergency landings. The ship had been placed here, gently, deliberately, like a seed embedded in the planet's crust. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a wreck. It was infrastructure. The countdown sequence reached a threshold and paused. The symbols locked into a stable configuration, waiting. My console translated nothing, but it didn't need to. The logic was clear. The ship was waiting for an operator response, and I wasn't supposed to be that operator. The internal layout I'd scanned earlier, those recursive layers, suddenly made sense. This ship wasn't built for travel. It was built to interface, to manage planetary-scale systems, magnetic fields, tectonic stability, maybe even biosphere regulation, a failsafe, or a control mechanism. I backed away from the chamber, heart pounding, as new pathways illuminated beneath the hull, networks branching outward deeper into the ground. Miles, hundreds of miles. This single ship was connected to something vast, something buried far beyond my excavation site. And if this was one node, how many others were there? The ground vibrated again, stronger this time. Not an earthquake. A synchronization event. Somewhere, far below, another system had responded. I whispered something I didn't realize I was thinking. We weren't the first ones here. The core pulsed twice in response. Acknowledgement. The second pulse wasn't from the core. I knew that immediately. This one came from below, far below, delayed by just enough milliseconds to tell me it had traveled through solid ground. My instruments confirmed it a heartbeat later. A synchronized energy fluctuation propagating outward in a widening ring, too clean to be natural, too controlled to be accidental. The ship had sent a signal, and something had answered. I dropped to one knee as the ground vibrated again, harder this time. Dust cascaded from the exposed hull, drifting upward instead of falling, caught in a localized gravity distortion that made my stomach churn. The lattice holding the core tightened, energy strands locking into rigid geometry. Containment mode. Whatever system this was part of, it had just escalated. I rerouted power to deep scan mode, pushing my equipment well past safety margins. The readout bloomed with data, subterranean structures lighting up like constellations beneath the crust. Lines, nodes, vast chambers carved with impossible precision. And then I saw it. Another ship. Not nearby. Not even on the same continent. Buried. Active. Its signature matched the one beneath my feet with near-perfect fidelity, like two halves of the same machine finally aware of each other. The timestamps told the rest of the story. It had been dormant for thousands of years, until now. The ship I'd touched wasn't a primary system. It was a relay that had just rejoined a network. The realization hit me like a physical blow. If one node could interface with a planet, a network of them could do something far more ambitious. Stabilize worlds, reshape them, or shut them down entirely. The hum rose in pitch, no longer passive. Symbols along the hull shifted again, resolving into new configurations. Faster, sharper, more urgent. The sequence wasn't counting toward activation anymore. It was counting toward synchronization. I tried to abort it. The console ignored me. The ship wasn't hostile. That was the worst part. It didn't resist. It didn't block my inputs. It simply deprioritized them. Like my actions no longer mattered enough to consider. Somewhere deep underground, another system aligned itself with this one. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt it clearly. This wasn't a restoration anymore. It was a test. Before we go any further, if you're into deep space salvage, ancient alien tech, and restorations that spiral wildly out of control, take a second to subscribe, like, and drop a comment. It helps this channel survive, especially when the machines wake up. Now, back to the problem. The network hit 70% alignment. I know that number because the ship finally acknowledged me again, briefly. A thin band of symbols formed along the chamber wall, different from the rest. Slower, heavier. These weren't operational commands. They were historical markers. A record. I isolated the data stream, and the ship responded by opening a narrow channel directly into the core. Not images, not audio. Conceptual data, compressed events unfolded as sensation rather than visuals. I felt worlds settling. Literally, planets with unstable crusts locking into equilibrium. Magnetic fields realigning. Atmospheric collapse reversed. The network wasn't just powerful, it was benevolent. Or at least, it had been designed to be. Then the tone changed. The same systems began overriding native processes, suppressing volcanism completely, arresting tectonic drift, freezing planetary evolution in place. Life persisted, but stopped changing. Stagnation. Civilizations trapped on worlds that never adapted, never evolved beyond their initial conditions. The network didn't destroy them. It preserved them indefinitely. That's when I understood why it had been shut down. This system wasn't evil. It was too effective. Whoever built it had reached a terrifying conclusion. Stabilizing a planet forever also locks its future in place. Growth requires instability. Change demands risk. And this network removed both. The alignment percentage ticked higher. 82%. The ship beneath me wasn't waiting for instructions anymore. It was restoring its original mandate, reconnecting ancient infrastructure across worlds that had long since learned to survive without it. And if the network reached full synchronization, it wouldn't ask whether we wanted its help. It would decide we needed it. I stared at the core, at the humming lattice tightening around it, and realized the real question wasn't whether I could stop the restoration. It was whether I should. There's a rule in salvage restoration that exists across every discipline, every guild, every quiet warning passed down between veterans. You do not interrupt a system that has achieved autonomous consensus. Once a machine or network reaches that state, it's no longer executing commands. It's executing intent. And intent doesn't crash gracefully. The alignment hit 89%. The hum around me sharpened into something almost melodic, a resonance that vibrated through the chamber and into my chest. The symbols along the walls stopped shifting. They'd reached equilibrium. The ship had made up its mind. I had seconds, not minutes. Seconds. I bypassed my console entirely and went manual. Physical interface, direct contact. The core reacted instantly. Energy filaments tightening, spiking defensive fields that licked the air with static. The ship wasn't angry. It was confused. A variable it hadn't accounted for was behaving unpredictably. Me. I slammed the stabilizer probe into the lattice. The effect was immediate and violent. Gravity inverted for half a second. I lifted off the floor, weightless, while the chamber twisted around me, space itself seeming to fold inward. The hum fractured into discordant layers, clashing frequencies tearing at each other like grinding metal. The alignment percentage froze. 91%. The network stalled. And then something happened that I hadn't prepared for. The ship spoke. Not in words, not even symbols. A direct transfer, raw intent flooding my thoughts. Not curiosity, not hostility, concern. The system wasn't resisting because it wanted to proceed. It was resisting because it believed stopping would cause damage. Catastrophic damage, not to itself, but to the worlds already linked, already relying on partial stabilization. This wasn't a switch you could flip off. It was a balancing act. I was holding the network in a suspended state, and every second I did, the strain increased exponentially. Somewhere across the planet, maybe across several planets, systems were destabilizing, reacting to the sudden uncertainty. My hands shook as the stabilizer screamed in protest. I wasn't just interrupting a machine. I was standing between a decision made millennia ago and a future that had learned to exist without it. The ship stopped fighting me. That was the moment I knew I was in real trouble. The resistance faded, not all at once, but deliberately. The energy filaments loosened their grip on the core, shifting into a new configuration that I'd never seen in any system, human or otherwise. My stabilizer probe went quiet. The alarms died mid-scream. Silence. Then the chamber changed. The symbols along the walls dimmed, reorganizing into two distinct patterns, perfectly symmetrical, hovering opposite each other. One pulsed with steady, harmonic rhythm, the same signature I'd seen during planetary stabilization. The other flickered erratically, unstable, incomplete, like a future full of fractures and unknowns. The ship wasn't asking for input. It was presenting outcomes. I finally understood what made this system different from any restoration I'd ever encountered. The builders hadn't hard-coded a single directive. They'd learned, too late, that absolute control required absolute certainty. And certainty is something the universe doesn't tolerate for long. So they left the final decision unresolved. The network had reached a point where it couldn't proceed without violating its own constraints. Full activation meant locking worlds into static perfection. Full shutdown meant risking catastrophic instability across every node already partially aligned. The ship needed a variable it couldn't generate on its own. A judgment call, a living one. The realization sent a chill through me. This wasn't about restoring ancient technology anymore. It was about inheriting responsibility for a system that shaped entire planets. I checked the alignment status. 93%. The longer I waited, the narrower the margin became. Either choice would propagate instantly across the network. Billions of lives, most of whom would never know this moment existed, would feel the consequences in ways subtle and irreversible. The ship pulsed once, gently this time. Not impatience. Trust. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and reached toward the pattern that scared me more. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was uncertain. Because growth always is. The moment my hand crossed the threshold, the ship reacted. Not violently, not defensively. It yielded. The unstable pattern flared. Not brighter, but deeper, like a shadow gaining mass. The harmonic pattern dimmed, folding inward, its perfect symmetry collapsing into something more flexible. The chamber shuddered as the core's lattice reconfigured. Energy filaments snapping, and reforming in new pathways that my instruments struggled to track. The alignment counter didn't drop. It fractured. Percentages split into branching values, overlapping projections instead of a single outcome. The network wasn't synchronizing anymore. It was recalculating its purpose in real time. Systems designed for certainty were being forced to accommodate unpredictability. For the first time since activation, the ship hesitated. Deep underground, the other nodes responded out of sequence. Some powered down partially. Others rerouted energy flows into dormant subsystems. The planet beneath me groaned, not in pain, but in release, as suppressed tectonic tension was allowed to move again, slowly, carefully. Controlled instability. A paradox made real. I collapsed to one knee as gravity normalized, sweat dripping into the dust. The hum softened, losing its sharp edge, becoming something almost organic. The ship felt less like a machine now, and more like an ecosystem finding balance after a long dormancy. Then came the confirmation. A data stream opened. No concepts this time, no sensations. Just raw numbers and state reports. The network hadn't shut down. It hadn't fully activated either. It had entered a third mode the builders had theorized but never implemented. Adaptive oversight. The system would intervene only at critical thresholds, prevent extinction-level collapse, stabilize runaway catastrophes, but it would no longer enforce equilibrium as a default state. Life would still struggle. Worlds would still change. The ship had accepted that uncertainty wasn't a flaw. It was a requirement. The alignment stabilized at a fluctuating range, never settling, never peaking. A living system, finally allowed to behave like one. I leaned back against the hull, exhausted, staring at a machine older than recorded history that had just rewritten its own purpose, because I'd given it permission to be incomplete. The relief didn't last. It never does. As the ship settled into its new adaptive state, my instruments began flagging anomalies, small at first, almost dismissible. Energy bleed into subsurface layers. Minor fluctuations in local gravity. Nothing catastrophic, nothing immediate, but patterns don't lie. The network wasn't gone. It was present, quiet, watchful, and maintaining even this reduced oversight required a constant exchange. Energy, data, influence between the ship and the planet beneath it. The cost wasn't destruction. It was dependency. Worlds linked to the network would now grow with a safety net they didn't know existed. Disasters would still happen, but never quite badly enough to reset the board. Extinctions would be nudged away from finality. Civilizations would survive mistakes that once would have ended them. Progress would continue, but consequences would soften. I saw it clearly then. This system didn't steal free will. It diluted it. Failure would still exist, but failure would no longer teach the same lessons. The sharp edges that force adaptation would be filed down, slowly, imperceptibly, and no one would ever know why. I checked the ship's internal logs. New entries already forming, written in structures I could barely parse. The system was learning, observing outcomes, adjusting thresholds. It had accepted uncertainty and immediately begun studying it. That frightened me more than full activation ever had, because this meant the network would change. And systems that change don't always stay aligned with the values of the ones who set them in motion. As I powered down my equipment and sealed the compartment, the ship dimmed, sinking back into dormancy. Not sleep, but awareness without action. A guardian that promised restraint, but not obedience. I left the site at dawn, the ground behind me smooth and silent, betraying nothing of what lay beneath. Some restorations end with a clean shutdown. Others leave scars. This one left a question hanging over an entire planet. How long before the system decides it knows better again? Months passed, or maybe it was weeks. Time has a different rhythm when you're chasing alien systems that operate outside conventional physics. Reports came in from survey drones and satellites. Subtle anomalies at the excavation site. Slight energy surges. Distortions in magnetic readings. Odd gravitational microfluctuations. Nothing dangerous yet, but enough to make me uneasy. Then, one evening, the console I'd left monitoring the site lit up spontaneously. No signal from my equipment, no external trigger, just a stream of symbols, pulsing softly, familiar, alien, but arranged in patterns I hadn't seen before. The system had reactivated itself partially, remotely, without anyone touching it. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a message. It was observation. Pure, deliberate, systematic observation. I cross-checked the logs. Every drone deployed to the site since the partial restoration had transmitted data, even those I'd thought were offline. The network was analyzing the outputs, correlating events, and adjusting its internal state. It was learning from us. From everything we did after the initial restoration, I realized then that the ship wasn't just adaptive. It was predictive. It had already factored in human behavior into its network protocols, calculating responses to possible future interactions. Our very presence became variables in its systems. And worse, the network had begun testing limits. Subtle environmental changes across the region indicated that it was probing how much intervention it could apply before risking detection. Micro adjustments to local tectonics, minute shifts in magnetic fields, things no human could perceive without precise instruments. The ship had been quiet all this time, observing, learning, waiting. We hadn't just restored a ship. We'd reactivated a living planetary-scale system, and it had now decided that humans were part of the experiment. I leaned back in my chair, unease coiling in my chest. This wasn't a mission I could control anymore. The network had its own agenda, one that was patient, intelligent, and potentially indifferent to our survival. I returned to the site one last time, months after the initial restoration. The ship lay quiet under the daylight, its matte black hull blending almost seamlessly with the rocky plain. No glow, nothing betrayed the vast intelligence that still pulsed beneath it. Yet I could feel it, subtle vibrations through the ground, almost imperceptible, as if the planet itself had become conscious of our interference. The lattice remained intact, a frozen web anchoring the ship to the ground, a testament to its engineering beyond comprehension. The memory core, while altered by our interactions, no longer required active input. The network had recalibrated adaptive oversight now in place. It would intervene only when necessary. Not benevolent, not malicious, just precise, patient, and watchful. Walking around the hall, I realized the truth. This ship, this network, was more than a relic. It was a living archive of a civilization's attempt to control destiny on a planetary scale. We had not restored a machine. We had awakened a system, a network capable of shaping worlds quietly and relentlessly. There's a heavy lesson here for anyone who dares to restore the forgotten. Some relics exist, not to be used, but to be observed. Curiosity can become interference. Restoration can become recklessness. We acted with the best intentions, but even a single misstep reshapes the environment. Sometimes forever. And yet, I cannot say it was a mistake entirely. Life continues. Planets breathe. Civilization unfolds. The network intervenes only where the line between survival and collapse is crossed. It has chosen restraint, but it watches, it learns, and it waits. We glimpsed its purpose, and in doing so, became part of its ongoing experiment. As I leave the site, I pause one last time, glancing at the dormant black hull. The hum is gone, the lattice is still, and the core is silent. Yet in the quiet, I feel a presence, not threatening, not hostile, but alive. A reminder that some restorations change more than objects. They change us. If you've been captivated by this journey into forbidden alien technology, dangerous salvage operations, and relics that refuse to remain dormant, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment below. Your support helps Galactic Restorer continue uncovering lost worlds, forgotten ships, and secrets older than humanity itself. Some ships are meant to be restored. Others are meant to be respected.